Increasing economic activity and a strong global market performance in Kenya is drawing the interest of international investors to East Africa. Mobile money has taken Kenya's market by storm, while geothermal electricity is also taking off in the East African region. Joining us today is Gyongi King. She's a Chief Investment Officer at CAVEO Fund Solutions. Gyongi, thanks for your time. Very much appreciated. East Africa, why is that looking so attractive at the moment? If you look at, South versus West, why is East continuing to get investors' attention?
It's a good question. I think actually what we need to think about it is much more globally. Why is East Africa looking attractive from a global context? And it's because it has all the elements that you can't really find in the world at the moment. There's growth, it's benefiting from a lower oil price, obviously an emerging urban population, being very innovative with the mobile money that you've just spoken about in the intro. And there's a lot of tailwinds in East Africa that are making it very attractive, not just for African investors, but global investors.
Let's talk about the mobile money. When I think East Africa and I think Kenya, M-Pesa comes to mind. What are some of the other innovations that have taken place in that particular sector?
So M-Pesa is the most well-known, and actually Safaricom have been the forefront and leaders there in Kenya. And what they've developed in combination with the bank, which has been quite exciting in the last year or so, is a way to extend loans and extend kind of the financial population and the financial inclusion into the lower end of the market. People that previously had never had access to banks, never had access to loans, now have it. How do they do that? Well, through the M-Pesa transactions, there's a lot of history that builds up about people, how often they use it, what sizes they use it in, and they can use that history to create a credit score for people. And when they apply for a loan, which the bank obviously has to facilitate because they have the license, they can then use this M-Pesa history to give them the loan much easier than you could in historical ways or in traditional ways that we've seen in the financial sector.
Is this innovation just very specific to Kenya and the East African region, or has it been replicated elsewhere? I understand with South Africa we had tried M-Pesa, it didn't really work out. I think we're giving it a second try. But in terms of replicating innovation like this?
It's very much dependent on the regulatory authority in each jurisdiction, and I think what we found in East Africa is they're much more open to this kind of innovation. And the reason you haven't seen it take off, for instance, in Nigeria or in South Africa, is that the regulator is a lot stricter in terms of what the mobile phone companies can do. Obviously there are M-Pesa balances that sit in bank accounts for these mobile phone companies, unused balances that people will then use. How are these regulated? It really depends on how the regulator sees these. And in Kenya specifically, the regulator has been very open to Safaricom facilitating and extending the banking network. So the innovation is there, and as you say, we've seen it in South Africa and you see elsewhere on the continent, but it's really only taken off in the way it has in Kenya because A, the mobile phone company is dominant in the region, so they have the market share, but secondly, the regulator supports it.
Speaking of regulators, how are credit ratings agencies looking at Kenya or the East African region as an investment case? And also from a security perspective, if you think about mobile money, you're using transactions in this innovative way, security, is that a problem or a red flag at all?
I think security is one of the biggest issues and one of the things that needs to be tackled by all the mobile phone companies that are offering this M-Pesa. Security issues in themselves are not an issue until you try and replicate what they call dual SIMs on phones, so people that have more than one mobile phone provider with one SIM card in the phone to give them both the mobile phone companies. That is a problem because it's not as secure as if you're using one SIM card. There are obviously other security issues, financial transactions, financial fraud, and that's really what the regulators are worried about in other jurisdictions and what the regulator needs to keep on top of and make sure that the mobile phone companies have the sufficient security to protect people's assets.
Is there sufficient dialogue happening there between the regulators in terms of making sure that these checks and balances are in place?
Again, it really depends on the regions, and I think what you're finding is people are much more aware of these security issues than they have been in the past. Obviously, with innovation and technology, that's always in front of the regulator rather than behind it. So the regulator always has to adapt to what's available. Innovation in itself creates issues, but it also creates lots of opportunity. And I think the regulators see this as an opportunity to really expand the financial network, because if you can bring more people into the financial services and the formal financial network, it really helps the economies grow and will facilitate growth overall.
While we're on the issue of security, let's look at security from a broader sense. Al-Shabaab obviously is something that has gripped that particular region. How are investors looking at this? Is this scaring them away, or are they saying there's risk everywhere, so let's just go ahead? If you want to do business in Africa, you're going to go ahead and do business in Africa?
I think people are obviously aware of the security issues. Is it deterring investment at the moment? No. And I think that's because when you look at globally, there are issues in a lot of regions. You really need to evaluate where your investments are being funneled. How is it going to affect your investment opportunity? If you're looking at companies that are obviously likely to be affected by kind of security issues, that's an evaluation you need to make. But I think at the moment, the tailwinds I described earlier are really pushing forward the Kenyan markets, irrespective of the security issues for the moment. Obviously these issues change and investors need to be on top of them all the time, and we have, as you know, elsewhere in the continent similar issues, and people need to evaluate that all the time.
I just want to shift focus away from the telecoms and the security issues now to talk about another sector that has been very innovative. That's geothermal electricity. Here in South Africa, we're still battling with Eskom, but looking at Kenya, they seem to be getting it right, or are they?
I think they've got some fantastic plans and projects on the pipeline. What they've embraced in Kenya is independent power producers. It's something that's relatively new in South Africa, and obviously these things take time to come online, but it is happening. But in Kenya, this has been the big project of the government, embracing independent power producers to be able to get them on the grid and generate electricity. And the government's got quite an ambitious plan, 5,000 megawatts by the end of 2015. So they've had to be quite aggressive in how they do that. The challenge for Kenya really is not about power production, it's about power utilisation. Only about 30% of the population has power, so has access to a light bulb, and actually they don't have the power-intensive resource businesses that we have in South Africa to really take up the slack quickly. There's really needs to be a build-out by business to increase their own capacity to use all this power that Kenya is producing. It's a really good problem to have, and actually you really need the generation first, then the distribution, and they've gone about it the right way.
Gyongi, thank you so much for coming in and telling us about this trend of investors moving towards the east of the continent. Innovation seems to be key there. Thank you so much. That was Gyongi King. She's a Chief Investment Officer at CAVEO Fund Solutions.